Kessa's fingers traced the cold metal wall of Luminara Station, counting steps as she walked. 32 steps from the recycling bay door to the first junction. Turn left. 48 steps to the cargo lift. Every single day she memorized these paths like her life depended on it, because in many ways it did. She was Velthran but not like the others. Her people were known across the galaxy as the most beautiful species anyone had ever seen. Their skin glowed with shifting patterns of light, creating a language more complex than any spoken words. When two Velthran talked, it was like watching living art. Colors danced across their bodies, telling stories, sharing emotions, making promises. Some patterns were so beautiful that other species paid fortunes just to watch Velthran conversations. But Kessa had never seen any of it. She'd been born blind. In Velthran culture, that made her worse than worthless. It made her an abomination. Her people believed that those who couldn't see the light had no soul. They thought blindness meant the universe itself had rejected you. Kessa's own parents had abandoned her at a government facility when she was 3 years old. She barely remembered them, just the feeling of their hands letting go of hers and never coming back. Now, at 19 years old, she worked in the dirtiest, loneliest job on the station. The recycling bay was where all the station's garbage came to be sorted. Broken tech, spoiled food, discarded containers, and things she couldn't even identify by touch. The smell was terrible. The work was exhausting. And the pay was barely enough to rent a tiny sleeping pod in the station's lowest level. But Kessa didn't complain. Complaining changed nothing. She developed her own ways of surviving. She hummed while she worked, using the echoes to sense the space around her. High notes for detecting nearby objects. Low notes for mapping larger spaces. The other workers thought she was crazy, but her humming had saved her from countless injuries. She'd learned to recognize people by their footsteps. The heavy thud of the cargo workers. The quick clicking of the insectoid merchants. The soft padding of the Velthran who worked security. Those security guards made her nervous. They were her own species, but they treated her like dirt on their boots. Sometimes worse than dirt. Today started like every other day. Kessa arrived at the recycling bay before dawn cycle, when the station was quietest. She preferred it that way. Fewer people meant fewer problems. She found her station, put on her thick gloves, and began sorting through the conveyor belt of trash. Metal items went in bin 1. Organic waste in bin 2. Plastics in bin 3. Glass in bin 4. Her hands moved quickly, identifying materials by touch and weight. She'd gotten good at this job. Maybe too good. Her supervisor kept increasing her quota, knowing she'd somehow meet it. 3 hours into her shift, she heard them. Young Velthran voices, speaking in the musical tones of light language. She couldn't understand what they were saying, but she knew that tone. They were laughing. And they were coming closer. Kessa's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. "There she is," one of them said, switching to standard galactic language so she could understand. The blind freak. She kept working, hoping they'd get bored and leave. They never did. Something hard hit her shoulder. A piece of trash they'd thrown. Then another hit her back. Kessa gritted her teeth and continued sorting, her hands shaking now. "Look at her," another voice said. "She can't even tell where we are." More laughter. Then she heard footsteps shuffling around her. They were surrounding her. Kessa's breathing quickened. She hated this feeling. The helplessness. The fear. Suddenly, someone kicked the bin beside her. It toppled over, spilling sorted materials everywhere. Hours of work ruined in seconds. "Oops," the first voice said. "Better clean that up, defect." They walked away laughing, their footsteps fading into the distance. Kessa stood there, fists clenched, feeling the familiar burn of tears she refused to let fall. Crying never helped. It only made them mock her more. She knelt down and began picking up the scattered items, sorting them again by touch. Her supervisor would dock her pay for the delay. He always did. He said it was her fault for being too slow, too clumsy, too defective to work properly. Around her, other workers continued their jobs. Nobody offered to help. Nobody ever did. In their eyes, she deserved this treatment. Weakness had no place in the galaxy. The strong survived. The weak suffered. That was the natural order of things. Kessa had heard it all her life. She'd learned not to expect kindness. Learned not to hope for better. Hope was dangerous. Hope hurt more than the mockery. So she kept her head down, finished sorting the spilled recycling, and continued with her shift. 32 steps to the junction. 48 steps to the cargo lift. Count, memorize, survive. That was all her life would ever be. She didn't know that everything was about to change. That a human named Jake Miller would walk into the recycling bay tomorrow and refuse to look away. That someone would finally see her as more than a mistake that shouldn't exist. But that was tomorrow. Today she was still alone. Jake Miller had never expected to end up in space. 2 years ago, he'd been working at a hospital in Seattle, studying brain injuries and neural rehabilitation. Then humanity made first contact with alien civilizations and everything changed. The government started recruiting doctors, scientists, and engineers for something called the Cultural Exchange Initiative. Jake applied on a whim, thinking he'd never get selected. 6 months later, he was boarding a transport ship to Luminara Station, one of the biggest trading hubs in the galaxy. The station was nothing like he'd imagined. Movies and shows back on Earth always made alien worlds look either sterile and perfect or dark and dangerous. Luminara was neither. It was messy, crowded, and alive. Hundreds of species lived and worked here. The air smelled like a mixture of spices, fuel, and things Jake couldn't identify. The corridors were constantly packed with beings of every shape and size imaginable. Jake's job was simple on paper. Observe. Learn. Report back to Earth about how other species lived, worked, and treated each other. The idea was that humanity needed to understand galactic culture before fully joining it. But his real job, the one nobody said out loud, was to figure out where humans fit in this massive universe. Were they advanced enough? Civilized enough? Did they belong here at all? On his second day, Jake decided to explore the station's lower levels. His assigned quarters were in the diplomatic section, which was clean and comfortable. But he wanted to see how regular people lived. The real station, not the polished version they showed to newcomers. The lower levels were different. Darker. More cramped. The walls showed years of wear and repair. This was where the workers lived, the ones who kept the station running while the wealthy merchants conducted business in the upper districts. Jake was walking through a cargo corridor when he saw her. A young Velthran woman, carrying a container of sorted materials. He'd seen Velthran before. They were impossible to miss. Their skin glowed with constantly shifting patterns, like living mood rings. Beautiful didn't even begin to describe them. But this woman wasn't glowing. Her skin was dim, almost gray. She was counting under her breath, her free hand trailing along the wall. Then Jake saw the crate. Someone had placed it directly in her path, right where she was walking. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but it was too late. She tripped hard, falling forward. The container flew from her hands, spilling recycling materials across the corridor. Plastic bottles, metal scraps, and glass fragments scattered everywhere. Jake rushed forward to help, but he stopped short when he saw the crowd's reaction. At least 20 beings were in that corridor. Not one of them moved. They just walked around her like she was part of the floor. One insectoid merchant actually stepped on her hand and kept going without looking back. "Hey!" Jake shouted, pushing through the crowd. "Someone help her." Nobody responded. Jake knelt beside the woman and gently touched her shoulder. She flinched away from him, her head turning in his direction but not quite looking at him. "It's okay," Jake said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Let me help you up." She hesitated, then accepted his hand. As she stood, Jake noticed her eyes. They were beautiful, the same luminescent purple as other Velthran eyes. But they didn't focus. They didn't track movement. She was blind. "Thank you," she whispered in heavily accented galactic standard. Her voice was so quiet he barely heard it. "Are you hurt?" Jake asked. She shook her head quickly. "I'm fine. This happens. I need to clean this up before my supervisor sees." She knelt back down and started gathering the spilled materials by touch, sorting them into piles with practiced efficiency. Jake knelt beside her and started helping. "You don't have to," she said. "I want to," Jake replied. "I'm Jake, by the way. Jake Miller. I'm human. New here." "Kessa," she said after a moment. "I work in Recycling Bay 7. They worked in silence for a few minutes, gathering everything. Jake noticed how methodically she worked, how her fingers identified each item instantly. Metal here. Plastic there. Glass in a separate pile. She never made a mistake. "How long have you worked here?" Jake asked. 6 years, Kessa said. "Since I was 13. 13. She'd been a child." Jake felt something twist in his chest. When everything was gathered, Kessa thanked him again and hurried away, counting steps under her breath. Jake stood there watching her go, anger building inside him. That afternoon he went to the station's administrative office. A bored-looking official, some species Jake didn't recognize, barely looked up when he entered. "I need information about disability services," Jake said. "Specifically for vision impairment. Where can I find accessibility resources on this station?" The official stared at him like he'd started speaking nonsense. Disability services? What are those? Jake blinked. Services for people with disabilities. Assistive technology. Accommodations. Support programs. We don't have anything like that, the official said. If someone can't function properly, they find work that suits their capabilities. Or they don't work. But that woman I saw today, the blind Velthrin. She's working in dangerous conditions with no support. The official's expression turned cold. The defective one. She's lucky to have work at all. We don't encourage genetic weakness here, human. The galaxy has no room for those who can't adapt. Jake left the office feeling sick. He'd studied dozens of alien cultures before coming here, but none of the reports mentioned this. The complete absence of compassion for anyone different. Anyone vulnerable. That evening, Jake found himself back in the lower levels, near Recycling Bay 7. He told himself he was just exploring, learning about the station. But really he wanted to see Kessa again. To understand how she survived in a place that saw her as worthless. He heard her before he saw her. That humming. Soft and melodic, rising and falling in strange patterns. Jake followed the sound and found her in the recycling bay, working alone in the dim light. She was humming different notes while she worked, and Jake suddenly realized what she was doing. Echolocation. She was using sound to map the space around her. She was brilliant. And she was completely, utterly alone. Jake stood there watching her work and he made a decision. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to help her. Even if the entire galaxy said she didn't deserve it. That's what humans did. They helped people everyone else had given up on. Jake started showing up at the recycling bay during Kessa's shifts. At first she ignored him. She'd learned long ago that curiosity from outsiders never lasted. They'd watch her for a few days, maybe feel sorry for her, then move on with their lives. She was just a temporary curiosity. Something unusual to observe before getting bored. But Jake kept coming back. Third day. Fourth day. A whole week. He'd bring food from the upper-level cafeterias, things Kessa had never tasted before. Earth food, he called it. Sandwiches. Fruit. Something called chocolate that was so sweet it made her laugh. "Why are you here?" she finally asked him one evening. "Don't you have important work to do?" "This is important," Jake said simply. "You're important." Kessa didn't know how to respond to that. Nobody had ever said those words to her before. Jake started teaching her things. He'd researched echolocation techniques used by blind humans back on Earth. He showed her how to click her tongue in specific ways, creating sharper sounds that gave clearer feedback than her humming. Within a week, Kessa could navigate the recycling bay faster than she ever had before. "There are humans who are blind?" Kessa asked one day, surprise clear in her voice. "Of course," Jake said. "Millions of them throughout history. Some born that way, some who lost their sight later. And you know what? Many of them lived incredible lives. Scientists, musicians, teachers, athletes. Being blind doesn't make someone less human. But humans accept them? You don't think they're defective?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Some people do think like that. We're not perfect. But most of us believe that everyone deserves a chance. Everyone has value. Being different doesn't make you broken." Kessa wanted to believe him. But it was hard to accept something so opposite from everything she'd been taught her entire life. Jake also told her about assistive technology. He described devices called screen readers that could speak text aloud. Canes that help people navigate safely. Even guide dogs, animals trained to help blind people move through the world. On Earth, there were entire laws requiring buildings to be accessible. Elevators with buttons in Braille. Audio signals at crosswalks. Ramps for wheelchairs. Why would they do all that? Kessa asked. Doesn't it cost money? Resources. Because people matter more than money, Jake said. And honestly, when you design things to help disabled people, you end up making life better for everyone. Those automatic doors? Originally made for wheelchair users. Now everyone uses them when their hands are full. Audiobooks? Made for blind people. Now millions of people listen to them while driving or exercising. It was a completely different way of seeing the world. Kessa had always been told she was a burden. A drain on resources. Something to be tolerated at best. But Jake talked about disability like it was just another part of being alive. Not something shameful. Just different. The more time they spent together, the more Jake learned about Velthrin biology. He'd sneak into the station's medical database at night, reading everything he could find. The Velthrin visual system was extraordinary. They could see ultraviolet light, infrared, electromagnetic fields. Their eyes processed information in ways human eyes never could. They literally saw more of reality than most species in the galaxy. And Kessa's brain had all the hardware for that incredible vision. Jake had convinced her to let him run a few scans, using portable medical equipment from his lab. What he found amazed him. Her visual cortex was perfect. Actually, it was more developed than most Velthrin her age. Her brain was ready to see. It was just waiting for input that never came. The problem was simple. Her optical nerves hadn't developed properly before birth. The connection between her eyes and her brain had never formed. But the processing center was there, ready and waiting. Like having a supercomputer with no keyboard or mouse attached. Jake started running simulations in his lab. Human neural interface technology had advanced tremendously in the past decade. Scientists could connect robotic limbs directly to the nervous system. They could create brain-computer interfaces that let paralyzed people control computers with their thoughts. If they could do that, maybe they could bridge the gap in Kessa's nervous system. He worked on it for weeks, running calculations, testing theories. The more he learned, the more convinced he became. This was possible. He could give Kessa her sight. Then one morning, Jake's door chimed. When he opened it, 3 Velthrin officials stood there, their skin patterns cold and formal. "Dr. Miller," the lead official said, "you are to cease all contact with the defective Velthrin immediately. Your research has been flagged as dangerous." "Dangerous?" Jake said. "I'm trying to help her. You are contaminating her with human ideology. Worse, you are researching interspecies genetic integration. This violates our strict biological purity laws. If you continue, you will be expelled from this station and humanity's exchange program will be terminated." They handed him an official order, stamped with multiple governmental seals. Jake read it slowly, his jaw clenching tighter with each line. They were forbidding him from seeing Kessa. From continuing his research. From helping the one person on this entire station who actually needed help. The officials left. Jake stood alone in his quarters, staring at the order on his screen. With one click he could file compliance. Follow the rules. Protect his career and humanity's place in the galaxy. Instead, he highlighted the entire document and pressed delete. Some rules were made to be broken. Especially rules that valued tradition over compassion. That protected pride over people. Jake had made his choice. Now he just had to figure out how to help Kessa without getting them both killed. Jake waited until Kessa's shift ended before approaching her. She was humming her navigation tune, cleaning up her workstation for the night. When she heard his footsteps, she turned her head toward him and smiled slightly. She'd learned to recognize his walk. "You're late today," she said. "I thought maybe you finally got bored of me." "Never," Jake said. "But I need to talk to you. Somewhere private." The tone in his voice made her pause. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need to show you something." He led her to a small storage room off the main recycling bay. Once inside, Jake pulled out his portable data pad and activated it. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. "I've been working on something. A way to give you your sight." Kessa went very still. "That's impossible." "It's not. Listen." Jake explained everything he'd learned. How her visual cortex was perfect and waiting. How her optical nerves were the only problem. How human neural interface technology had advanced enough to potentially bridge that gap. His words came fast, excited, like he'd been holding this in for weeks. When he finished, Kessa was silent for a long time. "Even if this is possible," she finally said, "it would cost a fortune. I can't afford anything like that. I can barely afford food." "Money isn't the problem," Jake said. "I've already figured out the technical side. But there's something else. Something you need to know before you decide." He took a breath. "I'd need to grow optical nerve tissue from my own DNA. Human tissue, modified to be compatible with your biology. Then we'd implant it, connecting it to your visual cortex through a neural interface. But the tissue needs to be taught how to communicate with your brain. It needs training." "Training?" Kessa asked. "For 6 months, maybe longer, we'd need to be neurally connected. My optic nerves would be linked to yours through a shared interface. My visual signals would route to your brain instead of mine. You'd see through my eyes while your brain learns how to process visual information. The new tissue would grow and integrate during that time." Kessa's breath caught. "What would happen to you?" "I'd be blind," Jake said quietly. "For those 6 months I wouldn't be able to see. All my visual input would go to you instead of me." "No," Kessa said immediately, shaking her head. "Absolutely not. I won't let you do that. It's the only way. Then we don't do it." Kessa's voice rose, something that rarely happened. You'd give up your sight for me? A stranger? Someone your own people wouldn't even consider worth saving? You're not a stranger anymore, Jake said. You're my friend. And you're worth saving. What if your sight doesn't come back? Kessa demanded. What if you stay blind forever? You'd throw away your entire life for someone like me? Someone like you? Jake's voice hardened. You mean someone intelligent, resilient, and capable who's been failed by every system that should have protected her? Yeah, Kessa. I'd do this for someone like you. Kessa felt tears burning in her eyes. What? Why would you do this? Jake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Back on Earth, I had a sister, Katie. She had cerebral palsy. Her muscles didn't work right. She needed help with almost everything. Eating, getting dressed, moving around. And you know what people said? They said she'd be better off dead. That she had no quality of life. That my parents should have prevented her birth. He paused. But Katie was the happiest person I ever knew. She loved terrible jokes. She painted these amazing abstract pictures using a computer she controlled with her eyes. She made everyone around her better just by existing. She died when she was 16. A seizure in her sleep. And I promised myself at her funeral that I'd spend my life proving that everyone has value. That being different doesn't mean being less. Kessa felt tears sliding down her face now. Jake. Humanity didn't reach the stars by being the strongest or the smartest, Jake continued. We got here because we refused to leave people behind. Because we believe everyone deserves a chance. That's what makes us human. That's what I'm proud of. He put his hand on her shoulder. Let me do this, please. Kessa wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that she couldn't accept such a sacrifice. But another part of her, a part she'd buried deep years ago, desperately wanted to see. To know what light looked like. What colors were. To see Jake's face for the first time. What if the Velthran authorities find out? She whispered. I've got people who'll help us. Doctors who think the genetic purity laws are garbage. We'll do it quietly. Carefully. But we will do it. Kessa took a shaky breath. If we do this, if something goes wrong and you lose your sight forever, I don't think I could live with that. Then we'll make sure nothing goes wrong, Jake said. Deal? After a long moment, Kessa nodded. 3 weeks later, they were in a hidden medical bay in the station's abandoned industrial section. 2 alien doctors were there, species Jake had befriended during his time on the station. They'd agreed to help, risking their own careers. The surgery took 6 hours. Jake went first, having tissue harvested and modified. Then came Kessa, the delicate work of grafting and connecting. The neural interface installation. The linking of 2 nervous systems across species. When Kessa woke, her brain exploded with input it had never received before. Light, color, shape. Everything at once, overwhelming and impossible. She gasped, crying out, and Jake's hand found hers in the darkness he now inhabited. It's okay, he said, smiling even though he couldn't see her face. It's working. Tell me what you see. Everything, Kessa whispered, tears streaming down her face. I see everything. The first days after the surgery were chaos. Kessa's brain didn't know what to do with visual input. Everything was too bright, too much, too fast. She saw colors but didn't understand them. Shapes that meant nothing. Her mind tried to process 20 years of stored visual information all at once. Jake talked her through it from his darkness. Through their neural link, he could feel her confusion and overwhelming sensations. Focus on one thing, he'd say. Just one object. Describe what you see. I see something round. Red, I think? Is this red? That's an apple, Jake said, smiling. Yes, that's red. Good. Now look at something else. Day by day, hour by hour, Kessa's brain learned. Jake guided her through colors, explaining what each one was called. She learned shapes, distances, depth perception. Things that came naturally to sighted people required intense concentration for her. But something unexpected was happening. Through their neural connection, Jake was experiencing Kessa's visual processing secondhand. And he started to realize that Velthran sight was nothing like human sight. Kessa didn't just see the visible light spectrum. She saw ultraviolet patterns on people's skin, infrared heat signatures, electromagnetic fields around technology. Her world was layered with information humans couldn't begin to perceive. There are words on that wall, Kessa said one day, pointing to what looked like blank metal to the security camera. There's nothing there, one of the doctors said. No, there is. Written in? I don't know what. But it's there. Jake checked. She was right. The words were written in UV-reactive paint, invisible to human eyes and most species. But Velthrin could see it naturally. Kessa was seeing things that had been around her entire life, things she'd never known existed. The months passed. Kessa grew more confident with her vision. She started venturing outside the medical bay during quiet hours, seeing Luminara Station for the first time. Jake experienced it through their link, seeing through her eyes while his own showed him nothing. And then something remarkable began happening. The neural interface wasn't just one-directional anymore. Kessa's enhanced visual processing was teaching Jake's grafted nerve tissue to process in new ways. Information flowed both directions. Jake started experiencing phantom images, fragments of Kessa's UV and infrared perception bleeding through their connection. When separation day finally arrived, both of them were terrified. What if Jake stayed blind? What if Kessa lost her sight again? What if the entire experiment had been a mistake? The doctors carefully began the disconnection process. It took hours, slowly separating their neural pathways while ensuring Kessa's new optical nerves were fully integrated. When they removed Jake's blindfold, he blinked in the bright medical lights. "I can see," he whispered. Then he looked at Kessa properly for the first time in 6 months. She was staring back at him, tears running down her glowing face. But Jake noticed something else. Around the edges of his vision, he saw faint traces of colors that shouldn't exist. Ultraviolet hints. Thermal patterns. His brain had learned to partially process Velthrin visual data. He'd permanently gained a shadow of her abilities. And Kessa could see perfectly. Not just adequately. Perfectly. Her visual cortex, trained by 6 months of intensive learning, processed information faster and more accurately than most Velthrin who'd been seeing their whole lives. Word spread quickly through the station. The blind Velthrin girl could see now. Some people celebrated. Others were horrified. The Velthrin government was outraged. But when Kessa first used her light language, everything changed. Velthrin communicated through bioluminescent patterns on their skin, but Kessa's patterns were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. She'd spent 19 years understanding the world through touch, sound, and vibration. Now she combined that non-visual knowledge with her new sight. Her light language told stories with depth that other Velthrin couldn't imagine. She painted emotions that incorporated texture and sound translated into light. When she expressed sadness, her patterns didn't just show the color of grief. They showed the weight of it, the texture, the echo. When she showed joy, it danced with the rhythm she'd hummed for years. People stopped in corridors to watch her speak. Even species who couldn't fully understand Velthrin light language felt something watching Kessa's patterns move across her skin. The Velthrin government issued warrants for both their arrests. Genetic contamination. Violation of purity laws. Unauthorized medical experimentation. The charges were serious enough to carry life sentences. But they'd underestimated the galaxy's response. Other species, inspired by Jake's sacrifice and Kessa's transformation, threatened economic sanctions against the Velthrin government. More importantly, young Velthrin across multiple worlds began speaking out. They revealed hidden disabilities their families had concealed for years. They demanded change. The old laws couldn't hold against that pressure. The Velthrin government quietly dropped the charges, though they never officially apologized. Kessa started creating art installations throughout the station. Light displays so intricate and beautiful that even humans with their limited visual range would stop and stare for hours. She incorporated sounds, textures, and patterns that told stories without words. Jake continued his research, now focused on cross-species medical cooperation. Other species began reaching out, asking for help with their own people who'd been labeled defective or useless. Jake built a team including Kessa, and together they changed lives. The neural connection between them never fully went away. Even across distances they could sense each other. Not thoughts or words but emotions, presence. When Jake was stressed, Kessa knew. When Kessa was happy, Jake felt it like sunshine. And in Kessa's art installations, hidden in UV spectrums that only Velthrin and Jake could partially see, she wrote messages. Private notes visible only to the man who'd given up everything to save her. Thank you for teaching me that being different doesn't mean being broken. Thank you for showing me that everyone deserves to see the light. The girl who'd counted steps in darkness now created light that filled entire stations. The human who'd walked into a recycling bay and refused to look away had proven what humanity brought to the galaxy. Not superior technology. Not greater strength. Just the simple, radical belief that every person matters. That kindness isn't weakness. That sometimes the most human thing you can do is give someone else a chance to shine. And across the stars, that message spread further than any government decree or ancient law ever could.